I really do believe that the films we fall in love with, especially when we're younger and when we're falling in love with film, they are films that speak to us because of where we are at in our life. Nashville spoke to me at that time because I was trying to make sense of the world as a young person and also make sense of what kind of films I might want to make. And it was a mind-blowing experience for me at a time when I could really use that. I actually saw Nashville for the first time when it came out in 1975. I was definitely blown away by its epic ambition, by its inventiveness of form, by its humor and pathos.
It's America, those cars smashing into each other and all those mangled corpses and just bodies.
It became a film that spoke to me on so many different levels as a narrative film that was trying to get its arms around a kind of America at the point of its 200th anniversary. Whether it was conscious or not on his part, I think that Altman achieved a kind of vividness of a very politically charged time that most traditional narrative film was failing to capture.
How you doing, Sarge? Did you kill anybody this week?
At the time that I saw Nashville, I wasn't really interested in making documentaries. I had fallen in love with movies. I wanted to make movies. But I think that even then, I recognized in it a kind of documentary feel.
Well, who do we have here? What is your name, honey?
Paul Harris.
Paul Harris. He's 13.
Altman is famous for his zooming. I always loved that about his work, and as I have grown older and gotten into documentary, that also was a kind of documentary aesthetic that he brought to narrative film. It was an aesthetic choice that grounded his films in a kind of reality that you don't get when you do a smooth, beautiful camera move into a subject or out of a subject. Life is messier, usually, than a lot of narrative cinema. And that's what I think gives lifeblood to documentary filmmaking, is to somehow get your arms around the messiness of people's lives and find a way to tell that in a narrative way that's satisfying and true.
Mama and Daddy raised me with love and care.
There is no simple narrative through Nashville. It is a series of interlocking narratives that carry you along, but it does build to a rather dramatic and satisfying climax nonetheless. There was something really intoxicating about that notion of creating a world into its own that is bound by that film. It may, of course, reflect the world around, but it is its own unique kind of little universe. And that film, to me, is a masterful example of how he went about doing that on a huge scale that never loses its sort of intimate connection to the subjects in the film. And it's such a prodigious achievement because there's something like 24 characters in this movie, and somehow I feel connected to all of them. I think I was drawn to making documentaries that tried to tell stories on a kind of larger canvas. You know, like Hoop Dreams. The main subjects are Arthur and William, but then there are their family members, and then beyond that there are teammates, and beyond that there are coaches and the schools that they go to and the neighborhoods that they reside in. So I imagine with Altman in telling this story, the choice to go from here to that story to this story, they probably had a freedom in editing, which I bet he and his editor found very liberating.
You want to talk about yesterday?
Watching it kind of reminded me of a film that I had done a few years ago of my own called The Interrupters, where I followed the stories of these ex-gangbangers and drug dealers and convicts who were now in the neighborhoods where they had once been a real problem and created violence and havoc. And they were trying to mediate violent conflict and redeem themselves in the process.
Stop.
One of the things I really loved about making that film was that I was unbound by traditional narrative, that we were able to follow their lives over the course of a year. And in the editing, I could do anything in terms of telling those stories and how one scene led to another. I'm drawn to stories of people whose lives, I think, illuminate larger fissures and issues of justice and race and the American dream. And I love trying to get at those issues, not by tackling them as big issues, but through story, through people's lives. And I think that that's at the heart of what Altman's doing in Nashville. The political turmoil of the time that the film captures is not capital T turmoil. It's a much more restrained and, I think, truer to America as a whole. And it's much more sly. You have this candidate, Walker, who is a kind of total outlier, who has won primaries and is running for presidency of a party called the Replacement Party. And he has all these wacky ideas that kind of cut across the political spectrum.
When you pay more for an automobile than it cost Columbus to make his first voyage to America.
The weaving of the Walker candidate through this lays a political consciousness on the film that's not necessarily borne out in the individual stories that we are seeing, but plays off of them in some interesting ways.
We can't vote for him because we're registered Democrats. Besides that, he's a little crazy, isn't he?
Well, they're all a little crazy, Miriam. Yeah, I'll drink to that.
You know, it's funny, if we had been having this conversation back during the Obama presidency, Nashville might not have felt quite as relevant as it does now, because it's almost like that guy got elected. He was speaking to some larger feeling of frustration in the country and a feeling of an inability for the powers that be to speak to it. And it's set in a world, Nashville, where in this last election, this notion of the people that were feeling left behind, you know, white, working class America, that politics spoke to them in some way. So it has a kind of added resonance. I still marvel at its influence. Roger Ebert has famously said that the movies are like a machine to generate empathy. And at their best, I think that's what the best films do. Whether they're documentaries or narrative, they allow us entry into worlds that are not ours. And the best ones do that in such a way that is intimate and often troubling and thought-provoking, but, at least for me, empathic.